So, Tina, knowing what you know about this movement, which is a lot, and after seeing what you saw last night, what's your sense of the MAGA creed going forward? Is it the one from Erica Kirk or the one from President Trump?
Honestly, at this point, I could not particularly tell you. There were two things that were unusual about attending this event, which was one, I have never seen a crowd like this turn out for a Trump event ever. It was a stadium packed to the rafters. I do not know if Donald Trump could fill an NFL stadium. And interestingly enough, after he started speaking, the crowd started to filter out. It was extremely clear that they were there for the religious element of celebrating Charlie Kirk's life. It was not as clear whether they wanted to keep following Donald Trump. And when I saw that, I went, I wonder if that means that they actually did like all of the other speakers from the White House who were there as well. So Erica and Turning Point do have a very huge constituency behind them. The question is, does she want to merge it with the Trump administration and the rest of the MAGA movement? I don't know. Charlie was quite good at that, but Turning Point is literally at this point where they could leverage Charlie's death as a martyr and turn it into a political force. Where it goes, I have no idea.
Yeah, and I think that's the question all of us are asking, Peter. And I don't think the president's remarks are necessarily surprising, nor is it that he, went off on various tangents along the way. But it can still be somewhat jarring to hear him say in this context, after the widow of Charlie Kirk speak, that he hates his opponents, and then a few minutes later say, the tradition of reason and open debate that Charlie practiced is the basis of our entire society. We will defend it at all costs. How should people make sense of what Donald Trump had to say yesterday, or can they?
Well, those latter words are probably the ones that were written for him by a speechwriter. He has a way of speaking that digresses from the teleprompter, and then he heads off into wherever he's thinking at the moment, and it's obviously more revealing about his mindset than the official words that are written for him that often tend to be a little bit more sedate, a little more restrained, or a little more politic. He's not a politic guy. You're right that it's not surprising in a way, and yet it still is surprising. I can't remember any president at a funeral, at a memorial service for somebody who's been killed or who's died, talking about hating opponents. It's just so jarring, to use your word, because that's not what presidents typically do, right? Even if presidents feel that way, even if presidents at times are quite divisive and quite, hard on their opponents, not usually in this kind of circumstance. This is kind of the circumstance where a president usually works toward bringing people together, calming the waters, lowering the temperature. That's just not the way he operates.
We have heard a lot of speakers invoke religion. In fact, again, in the way that Peter was just talking, I don't know when I have ever seen a service for a public figure, and that includes some religious figures, say Jimmy Carter, whose services were held in a church, where there was more overt commingling of politics and faith. Here's just some of what we heard last night.
The day that Charlie died, the angels wept, but those tears have been turned into fire in our hearts. And that fire burns with a righteous fury that our enemies cannot comprehend or understand.
We will come to find that in the final moment, that Western civilization was saved through Charlie's sacrifice in the only way possible, by returning the people to Almighty God.
He always said to me, if we could just figure out how to bring the Holy Spirit into a Trump rally, I think you've done it.
Reid, I noted the divides we've seen in the Republican Party recently over the Epstein files, over the war in Gaza, now over free speech. Is the thing that is going to bring them back together potentially this focus on Christianity, on faith? How do you see what we heard yesterday, so much invocation of the Christian faith?
Well, a couple of things. I think the Venn diagram between the evangelical church and the Republican Party is now very, very narrow. I think the other part, too, that has been such a key part of this and other political movements throughout history is that when you talk about faith, you're now getting outside of politics and even humanity, and you're now into the supernatural. So this is not a fight for legislative seats. This is not a fight about policy. This is a fight from their perspective of good versus evil. If you are with us, you are good. And as Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, probably the scariest person in the administration at this moment, have said, is they hate their opponents. Those who disagree with them are not just their adversaries in politics, right? That everybody is operating in good faith, but they're enemies, they're mortal enemies, they're supernatural enemies. And I think that is one thing that a lot of us tend not to either understand or want to accept, is that they are literally playing for a higher power. And let me just also say that so much of this, too, was sort of a roundup and a tryout for so many of these people who I think want to be Donald Trump's successor.
Yeah, I don't think there was any question about that. But Tina, when we talk about sort of this message that we're playing for a higher power, the question really becomes about whether or not we're going away from the founding fathers. Is essential to MAGA's goal that the United States is a Christian nation, or at least based on Christian values?
It absolutely is, although what you are seeing here is a movement called Christian nationalism that merges Christianity as it's been practiced in America for, centuries, with a very specific interpretation of what the founding fathers wanted, what Aristotle wanted, going all the way back to the ancients. You saw Larry Arnn, who is the president of Hillsdale College and a proponent of this strain of interpretation of the Bible, merge Christianity and protecting the Western civilization values into one and the same thing. It's a very somewhat convoluted argument, but if you distill it into the right talking points, it really hits you in the patriotic heart area, as it were.
Peter, I want to play a little bit more of what Donald Trump had to say, and this is specifically about Kirk's assassination. Take a listen.
The Department of Justice is also investigating networks of radical left maniacs who fund, organize, fuel, and perpetrate political violence. And we think we know who many of them are. But law enforcement can only be the beginning of our response to Charlie's murder.
There are people who are already voicing concern, Peter, that what he says, when he says this is just the beginning, he could use Kirk's death as kind of a pretext for other things, broader crackdown, for example, on free speech. Have you seen signs that Kirk's assassination has essentially changed the way Trump approaches his adversaries, the way he views his options to, in his view, fight back?
Well, it certainly accelerated and escalated what has already been a pretty remarkable campaign of what he himself used the word retribution, right? He came into office saying he was going to exact punishment against those he believed wronged him in some way or another, whether it be prosecutors, whether it be political figures, whether it be his own former aides. He, long before Charlie Kirk's assassination, he had made a pretty remarkable and concerted effort to use the power of government against the people he considers to be his enemies. Now, it seemed in the last week or two, it's accelerated. And you're right. When he talks about going after left-wing radical groups there's no evidence that the shooter in this case, the assassin in this case, had any connection to any group. There's no evidence whatsoever from the authorities, at least, that there was any sort of conspiracy behind this other than a single person who was radicalized and picked up a rifle. History is full of examples of autocratic societies where, active violence ends up becoming the trigger for a much more, toxic response. And the question is whether or not, the president, in his grief for somebody who was an ally, and he is genuinely, I think, upset about this. He himself was the target of 2 assassination attempts and feels it kind of personally, whether he uses this as a political, justification for more action. The things he said in the last week certainly give that impression.
So, Reed, let's talk about the more short-term politics of this. And one of the things that we heard was that this is an organization that's going to continue to grow. It also dovetails with a recent study, Reed, that shows that Gen X and millennials are now attending church more regularly than any other group. So if Republicans want to appeal to the people who love Charlie Kirk, and that in big part was young people, and specifically young men, is what we're seeing the best way to do it? Or is there a risk in alienating more people than it attracts?
Well, I would say this is that as we see that there are a lot of cracks in what we would consider the left-right spectrum in this country that we've been used to for so many years. And what I would say is this, is that what Kirk was able to do was not necessarily give those young men any positive path forward, but he gave them something. And I think that you can see that what the country needs is not just Erica Kirk and Turning Point USA, espousing their values, which I don't know that necessarily all Americans agree with, or even most Americans agree with. But I would say this is that for those Gen Z and millennial voters for whom the future is a very uncertain place, that all of the things that we were able to take, not necessarily for granted, but on faith, that we could be better than our parents, we could own a home, we could start a family, and we could do all those things in a reasonable timeline, are now being pushed further and further into people's lives, if they're happening at all. And again, some message, even if it's ugly, will beat no message. And I think that that's the one thing that the right mixed with the Republican Party and MAGA is that whether or not you agree with it, it is a consistent message that, as Tina said, it's America is great, God is great, stick with us, we'll take you into the future. I don't believe in most of it, but that doesn't mean that a lot of people don't.